here's my review of Mickey 17. Now, this is a movie that I personally really liked it, but I could see why someone would not like it. For example, I saw this movie last night with my sister and her boyfriend, and they did not really care for it that much at all. But I was able to get into it. But I think a glaring problem with this movie is it seems like it is very unfocused. And so our basic premise here is we're on Earth in the future. It's basically life is kind of terrible, and they're going to it's kind of like this dystopian reality. And then so Mickey signs up to be an expendable so he can go to space, and they're going to basically infiltrate, they're going to look for this new world. And like there's so much obvious, and a lot of this like social commentary is so blatantly obvious that it kind of almost feels like a little too like silly. Like Mark Ruffalo is like the tyrannical dictator of this new colony, of this ship. He's the captain, and it's pretty obvious who he is trying to mimic. It's like not even subtle about it. And I think like I get it, but I think it should have been more subtle, because when it's so obvious, it just doesn't really. I don't think that the commentary works as well when you're just going so over the top and like, do you get it? Do you get it? Do you get it? It's like, yeah, we get it. We get who it is. But it just doesn't work, at least for me. Although like Mark Ruffalo as an actor, I mean, I think he's fine, but he's an actor I've never really been like blown away by in really anything I've seen him in. But he's okay here. Let's get to the actual basic premise of this movie. So Mickey applies to be an expendable, because that's really the only way he can get off Earth. And what an expendable is they basically print your DNA, and whenever someone dies, whenever one of you dies, they just transfer your consciousness into a new body. And so there's multiple. So basically, he can basically never die. And Robert Pattinson in this movie proves why he is such a fantastic actor, because here, like Mickey as a character, Mickey Barnes, is so meek and kind of pathetic, but also so endearing and likable. At least I found him to be. And like Robert Pattinson, he takes a plot where at some points that can just be a little, like this movie could be a little slow at times, but because he's just such a strong actor, he's able to make it entertaining throughout the whole time, at least to me. But one of the things I want to talk about, and one of the reasons why I say this movie feels very unfocused, is because of all the different plot lines. Specifically, when he's on the ship, Mickey falls in love with Nasha, another crew member. And there's like this, that's like a big part of this movie. And then it gets all complex with like they almost like this comedic, like where the other one, once they clone Mickey 17, and like once they get Mickey 18 involved, like they kind of both are almost going after her, like both trying to be with her. So it just creates this weird love triangle. And there's some weird scenes in this movie. Really weird scenes in this movie with the three of these characters. But like I said, this movie is in many ways like a comedy. It's like, and because it tackles so much the sci-fi, fantasy, comedy, drama, commentary. But that's where I feel like it kind of lost itself when you're trying to tackle so many different ideas. And one thing like that makes this such a dark comedy, it's weird, is how they use Mickey. Basically, he's basically a lab rat for this new planet, where they send him on this new planet that they found. Like, for example, like he's testing to see if the air is breathable. And right after, he gets like extremely sick and dies. And that's where the comedy comes in, of just like the over the top, almost like laughing at him getting tortured, because he's such a sympathetic character. You feel bad, obviously, but it's done in such a comedic way where it's not like a hard to watch movie. It's very interesting, just the tone of this movie. There's so many dark concepts, but I remember when the first teaser for this movie came out, I'm like, oh, that looks very interesting, very dark and weird. And this movie is very weird, but it's just so over the top in its comedy as well, which I think kind of worked in its favor for me, because it just allowed it to be just so entertaining. Just the dichotomy between Mickey 17 and Mickey 18, as they're both so different. Like, Mickey 17 is kind of all meek and frail, and then Mickey 18 is a lot more confident and more upfront. And I think that that works so well. And like, Robert is such a fantastic actor that he's able to make them both feel so unique, even though he's playing both, obviously. Just very fascinating stuff. But like I said, the glaring issue with this movie, at least for me, even though I personally really liked it, but it just, because of how unfocused it is, there, like, and we have all these different plots, because like for the whole like 2/3 for the first 2/3 of this movie, like, it's very obvious, it feels like, where it's going. So we have this love story, and then we have this experimentation subplot, like, where, and just and there's just the comedy between the two Mickeys, and like exploring this world. But then, like, we find like this alien species, who earlier in the movie, like, they basically, he thought that they were going to eat him, and then they find out that they saved him. And then it basically, like, turns into this, like, oh, save these aliens. And it's just, it felt so off, because it felt like such a weird, like, tonal shift from this, like, it's not at all a grounded movie, but it's just like, it feels so different from the first 2/3, even though this whole movie is silly and over the top, and it doesn't really take itself seriously. It just, this particular plot line feels like it doesn't really mesh well with the others, because they're talking about this, like they're obviously doing like this immigration metaphor and colonization metaphor. But it's weird because they don't really discuss that at any points earlier in the movie, so it kind of just feels like out of the blue. So it's just odd. But as I keep saying, the dichotomy between Mickey 17 and Mickey 18, and Robert Pattinson being as good a performer as he is, allows this movie to, at least in my opinion, be pretty good. I didn't think it was amazing, but it was pretty good. And of course, like, the love story between Mickey and Nasha, who played, I mean, Naomi Ackie is great. I mean, I haven't seen her in a whole bunch of things, but I really liked her in Blink Twice last year, and she continues to give a great performance here. I really enjoyed her performance here. I thought she was great. So yeah, I liked this movie. I barely even talked about Steven Yeun. Like, Steven Yeun is in this movie, who, I mean, I love him from The Walking Dead, but he's not, he as a character also feels kind of weird, because like, he's a friend to Mickey, but then at some point kind of takes more of a villain route. And also Toni Collette is great as well. But it just feels so odd. Like, that's the main problem with this movie, is it is so ambitious, and it's tackling so many different things. Like I said, just the idea of the morality of cloning is like, who knows, maybe we will be able to clone people real one day with all the way scientists. Like, it talks about the idea of like a soul, and then it goes into more political stuff like immigration, colonization. But it feels just like you have a bunch of different ideas, and it was kind of jammed into this one movie. But like I said, I ended up liking it, but I could see why a lot of people didn't. Like I said, my sister and her boyfriend, who I went with, they didn't really like it. And it's like, I can see why. It's a very unfocused movie, and I feel like, especially with the third act, with like the whole like save the aliens, like, it just felt so out of nowhere to me. So yeah, I really like this movie, but I definitely think it is a little messy, and it has way too many ideas for its own good, and it should have just tried to focus on a more linear story. But yeah, personally, I liked it. I really like this movie, but it's just got quite a bit of really noticeable problems.